This is a brainstorming session video because I'm talking about tower defense and making a mechanical version of it from Lego. I'm also monitoring my audio right now because the last two times I've recorded this video, it's just crapped out my audio. Don't know what OBS is doing. It's been real buggy lately. Anyway, I've got a visual aid here too. But what is tower defense? In a nutshell, it is a genre of game in which a player defends a tower or a gate, whatever the case may be, from enemies that follow a set path. And the method in which the player defends this gate is by using these, what I'm just going to call defense modules, right? You place these modules wherever you want them on the game board, whatever you want to call that too. And essentially, at a certain point, those modules start tracking the enemies and then interact in some way, usually with projectiles, whatever the case may be. Now, why do I want to make this specifically? Well, Lego, a couple of years ago, actually I think last year specifically, they actually made the Pac-Man game cabinet, which I loved. I'm not like a big player of Pac-Man, never really have been. Obviously, I've played it in my childhood, of course, but it's a massive IP. It's a big pop cultural, icon, right? Tower defense is still a really fun set of games, genre of games, but it doesn't have that same sort of IP associated with it in the way that like Pac-Man does, because Pac-Man is a genre of game. Playing that type of game. There are other games that do what Pac-Man does, but Pac-Man is the IP that you associate with. Anyway, so what I wanted to show you today is one of the mechanisms involved with making a game like this work. This game needs basically three mechanisms and a way to reset, right? One of those mechanisms, quite simply, is just a chain that drives these characters along their set path. That's something I've already designed in the past in one of my other builds, which I call the Copper Mine, and I'll post a video to it up here at the end of this video. Still, what I wanted to talk about as well, though, are some of the other more complicated mechanisms involved with this, right? Because you can synchronize things to the chain. That's, not a huge deal. Obviously, it's going to come with some hurdles, but then you also have to, at the gate portion, detect how many enemies pass that gate and in what state those enemies are in, right? Whether they've been unscathed, so the player has not attacked them or not defeated them, or they've been defeated, or some combination of both, right? Because oftentimes these enemies come in waves. It's not usually just a one-off. So my idea is that this game comprises of 3 waves: a first wave with 3 enemies, a second wave with 4 enemies, a third wave with 5 enemies, and the 5th enemy being slightly harder than the others in some way. Anyway, so how do you progress in this game? Well, that's what the gate is for. So the gate will actually detect the state at which the enemies are in. If all enemies of a particular wave make it past the gate unscathed, so they have not been defeated, then the game will punish the player, and it'll do so by ticking up a little counter, whatever the case may be, an anti-score, essentially, right? And then you'll play that wave again. After a certain amount of times of this score going up, the game will lock out. You have to reset it. Simple enough. Second, say some of the enemies are defeated, but not all. In that scenario, the game is going to repeat the current wave you're on. So it's just basically going to reset itself, but it's not going to tick up or down that anti-score counter, right? Third is if you successfully defeat all of the enemies, then how does the game behave? Well, in that scenario, the game rewards the player by giving them access to more defense modules. And I could talk about that separately, probably in its own video. And the game is also going to then progress to the next wave. So instead of having 3 enemies, the game's going to start again, but now you're going to have 4 enemies to deal with. And if you can do that 3 times, or whatever the case may be, then you win the game. Simple enough. Okay. What is the other mechanism? It is the auto tracking system. So as tower defense games go, as gate defense games go, typically what happens is as an enemy follows along its path, once it gets into range of these defense modules, they will start tracking that enemy and firing at them or interacting with them in some way, right? I've developed a mechanism that's dead simple that does this, or at least it does the tracking part. It doesn't do the firing. The firing can be synchronized to the chain itself. That's a separate thing. But the tracking portion is actually really easy. In total here, there are like maybe 15 pieces, and that's like everything you see plus what's behind this. The way that it works is really simple. This is the enemy, this is the defense module, this is always going to be pointing to the enemy. As this moves along the path, you'll see that it snakes along and the defense module continues to track it. Doesn't matter where the enemy is at along that module, or along that path, inevitably it's being tracked, right? So the way that that works is actually really simple. It's just using gravity to pull this axle down, and as this moves, I'm going to try and move it from the other side. You can see that that axle just continues to collide with, to connect with that enemy on the track, right? On that placement. So that's essentially the tracking system in a nutshell. Now, it's more complicated than that because when an enemy is defeated, you need it to release that axle. That's a separate thing, right? But generally speaking, this is easy enough to understand. So then, where do you go from here? Well, here's the thing. Like I said, there aren't any strong IPs really associated with tower defense or gate defense, right? There are definitely some that have come and gone along the ages, some that have been juggernauts of their time, but nothing today that you associate with this genre of game in the way that you associate Pac-Man with that genre of game. So in this case, I think this is a situation where it's actually best for, if this was to be a Lego product, for Lego to actually reflect on their own history. A lot of tower defense games use the setting of, the window dressing of, the veneer of, whatever you want to call it, medieval times or fantasy times or space or pirates or whatever the case may be. Or, you know, some characters like roaming along through a jungle and fighting like animals or whatever. Anyway, silly stuff. It's fun. So, obviously, Lego has delved into several of these themes several different times. Space, pirates, you know, Vikings, medieval, castle, so on and so forth. So lean into that. Obviously, you know, the medieval stuff's been hitting markets pretty strong these past few years as well, with the one-off and two-off kind of sets that Lego's been doing. So yeah, if you leaned into that, I think that is a viable way to make a game like this seem palatable. If the gate is a castle build, if the modules are all things you would see in a fantasy era, whatever, right? Ballistas and catapults and whatever else. And if the enemies make sense for something like this. That way, when you buy a set like this, you're also still getting something that beefs up, that amps up your castle collection, whatever the case may be, but you're also getting all of these awesome mechanisms that work under the hood. Sure. So the way that the system would work is quite simple, just using like a crank mechanism on one side. If the game locks up, if it's detected that you've lost, then there'd be like a little way to reset it in the similar area too. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I don't want to make this video too long or drawn out. So if this is an idea that you like, let me know in the comments below and let me know what you would change or what you would address with a concept like this. But you can also check out the links for Discord, Instagram, and Patreon in the description if you want to check those out, if you want to take the conversation further, or if you want to support the channel. And you can also support the channel by subscribing and getting us closer to that 4,000 subscriber goal. Hopefully the audio in this one is not crap. I don't know what's going on with OBS. All right, that's going to be it for this one. Subscribe and take care.